loved us and given himself for us an offering and a sacrifice to God for a sweet-smelling savor. All right, we are to walk in love, and the model we are to follow, the pattern we are to trace our lives on is Christ. I remember when I was a little kid and starting out in school, one of our teachers wanted to teach us how to draw, and so she passed out papers of pictures, and the pictures were in great big bold ink. And then she passed out what she called tracing paper. And all the little kids would take the paper and stick it on the bold page, and the picture would come through, and we'd take our little pencils and we would draw tracing. That's the very word pattern in the New Testament. That's the word for type or an example. It's used, as Paul says to Timothy, be an example to the believers. Be somebody the believers can trace their life on. Well, that's exactly what he's saying here. Take Jesus Christ, the bold statement of Christ's life, and put your life on top of it and trace your life out just as his is. He is the pattern. This is the heart of the passage. We are to love as he loved. Now, backing up to verse 32, I remind you last time that the major characteristic of God's love is that it is forgiving. You see it there in verse 32, forgiving one another as God, for Christ's sake, hath forgiven you. Now, if we're to walk in love, that's the first characteristic I want you to note. It is a forgiving kind of love, and we went into that last time, didn't we? God's love is a forgiving love. Now, by the way, there's a footnote that you ought to see in verse 32. Forgiving one another even as God hath forgiven you. Now, if it just said that, if it just said forgiving one another as God hath forgiven you, we'd have a little problem. Because we'd say, now look, God, you're a holy God. You're an absolutely righteous God. And you hate sin. And you can't tolerate sin. And the Bible says you will punish sin. In fact, it says the wages of sin is what? Death. Now, God, how can you just forgive like that? If it said, forgive one another as God has forgiven you, we'd say, well, how can you just do that? How can you just say, well, I know I don't like that stuff, but I'll forgive you? Well, what does that do to God's justice? Doesn't it violate his holy justice? No, because the little phrase is there. For Christ's sake, which means because of what Christ has done. In other words, that penalty which was ours was borne by Christ. And because of something Christ did, God is able to forgive. And that's the whole point. When Christ, verse 2 now, when Christ gave himself for us an offering and a sacrifice to God as a sweet-smelling savor, he paid the price that God's justice demanded and freed God to forgive the sinner. But if it had not been for Christ, it would not have happened. God can love us and God can forgive us because Christ paid our penalty. That is the message of the 10th chapter of the book of Hebrews. Hebrews 10:10, by which we are sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ. In other words, the only thing that sets us apart to God is that Christ bore our sin. Verse 12, this man, after he offered one sacrifice for sins forever, sat down on the right hand of God. In other words, sitting down is the picture of rest. And when Christ one time made one sacrifice, it was so total and so complete that he never needed to do another thing. He sat down, he was finished. And verse 14 sums it up. By that one offering, he perfected forever them that are sanctified. He bore in his body our sins. He who knew no sin became sin for us. And so Christ did something that freed God to love us. And God's love, first of all, is forgiving. Now, secondly, I told you God's love is not only forgiving, but it is unconditional. His love is not defined by the object in any sense. It is his nature that loves. It is his innateness that loves. It is God loving as God must love because he's God. And so his love is forgiving and unconditional. And the third thing is self-sacrificing. God's love is forgiving, unconditional, and self-sacrificing. God so loved the world that he, what's the next word? Gave. That's the key. It is self-sacrificing. Now listen, people. This is a very basic truth you must get. If we are to love like God loved, if we are to imitate God, then we must love people with a forgiveness that is without limits. We must love people unconditionally with no dependence upon their response. And we must love people sacrificially. That is, with the giving of ourselves, not the seeking of something from them. Now, people, listen. When you live and walk in love, it doesn't mean you go around saying, well, I like that person and I like this person, and you work on an emotional level. No, it means that it is your nature to be forgiving without limits, loving without even necessary response, and self-sacrificing, seeking only to give and not to gain. So we said last time that Jesus loves us. When we sin, He forgives us. When we don't respond, He keeps loving us. And when all we want to do is take, He keeps giving. That's the kind of love that is to characterize our lives. Unconditional, forgiving, and self-sacrificing. I would be unfaithful to my own mind if I didn't have you look at John 13 for just a moment, and then we'll close out those review points and go to the next. But in John 13, which I think is the most beautiful picture of the love of Christ, apart from the cross, anywhere in the Bible, John 13, I want you to see this unconditional, forgiving, self-sacrificing love in action. Now, you remember the setting because I've taught it to you many times. But in John 13, the disciples are having an argument. And they're arguing about who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom. They're really concerned about who's going to rank high when Christ sets up His earthly kingdom. They want to get in on the gravy. They want to be big shots. They want to be mucky mucks. And the Lord sees them in this big argument. And the real issue here is, of course, that Jesus is about to be crucified. And He's already told them this. He's already told them He has to die. He's already given them the whole outline. But they are absolutely indifferent to what He's going to go through. They don't even care. They're not even concerned about it. They are absolutely selfish. They are absolutely sinful. They are absolutely unresponsive. If there was any real love in their hearts, they would have been comforting and encouraging and sharing that love with Jesus Christ. If there was anything of self-sacrifice in their lives, they would have been washing His feet. They would have been at His hand saying, what can we do, Lord? Because You're the one that's going to bear this. But instead, their selfishness was manifest. Their sinfulness was manifest. Their self-centeredness was manifest as they argued about who would be the greatest in the kingdom instead of being concerned about Christ. And in that argument, nobody would wash anybody's feet. But it was a custom to wash feet in those days before you had a meal. But none of them would do it because none of them wanted to take the role of a servant. They were all fighting for the chief places. And so supper had begun. And after it had begun, Jesus took a basin, it says in verse...
And that's what Dorcas did. Because the text says she made what? Tunics and garments. She was a seamstress. Our sister had a passion for fashion. And when she had all these dreams in her heart of changing the world, she looked down and she saw a needle. Around her neck was a measuring tape. And she said, I wonder if. And so listen to me. To get from me to sew, she used a needle pulling thread. Come on, don't live your life focused on me, a name I call myself. Use what's in your hand. If it's a needle pulling thread, fine. Whatever God has given you in your hand, He wants to use that to unlock and unleash what's in your heart. At least that's what doe, a deer, a female deer, Dorcas teaches us. Hey, it's the sound of music all up in here. All right, so in Dorcas, we have a holding pattern. A pattern for how to hold. And you can't sew a complicated project if you don't have a pattern. How many of you know you got to go down to Joann Fabrics? You got to go to Hobby Lobby. You got to get you to Michael's Arts and Crafts Supply and buy a pattern. And a pattern is what you lay out on top of your fabric so you know the shape that you'll cut out before you use your thread to sew. So I believe in Dorcas, we're given a different way of looking at our holding patterns by making sure we understand that we have a pattern for how to hold, A pattern for how to hold what's in our hand so God can unlock what's in our heart. For that is God's desire. The problem and the disconnect for us is so many of us look at what is in our hand and we see no connection to what's in our heart, so we do nothing. Think about a crowd of people and you need to feed them. What's in your hand? 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Well, this can't do anything for that, therefore I'll do nothing. What's in your hand? Well, freedom for God's people from the Egyptians. What's in your heart, rather? Freedom from God's people from the Egyptians. What's in your hand? A staff. If you give God what's in your hand, a staff, he'll unlock what's in your heart. If you give God your loaves, he'll feed the crowd. What's in your hand? A cup. What's in your heart? Rebuilding the city of Jerusalem. Use your cup, Nehemiah. Use what's in your hand. You give it to God. Don't stop believing just because you don't understand how it's connected. Use what's in your hand. Use your needle. Use your cup. Use your staff. Use your resources. It doesn't feel like it's enough, but God is able to make all grace abound towards you. You just got to get under his plan. Get under his authority. Get under his reign. And so that's what Dorcas did. So in her, we find a pattern for how to hold, a pattern for how to have a light touch, a pattern for how to have a longer vision, and a reason to no longer give in to the excuses that fill our heart when we look at what's in our hand and we barely see enough for ourselves, much less for how God could do anything else. We get talked out of using our resources to do God's work, don't we? We say stupid stuff. Well, I give my time, so I don't need to give my money. You know what I say to that? I say, available. Available. Aren't you glad that Jesus didn't just give us his time, but he gave us his blood as money? Come on, blood money. More precious than gold or silver. He didn't come just to give us his time. You know, Margaret Thatcher, she used to be the Prime Minister of England in the 80s. She said no one would be talking about the Good Samaritan if he only gave time, but he had money too. Someone had to pay the bill at the end. Someone had to buy the bandages. Someone had to give the oil and the wine. Hey, listen, if we're going to reach Orlando, if we're going to reach this country, it's going to take money. Ministry takes money. We need to have resources, not just time. Don't fall into available. I got another one. How about this? How about, well, God doesn't need my money. This church certainly doesn't need my money. Look at all this fancy everything. Blah, blah. Avela, say it with me. Bull. Yeah, God doesn't need your money, but you need his blessing. Warren Wiersbe said, you know, a God who paves the streets of his heaven with gold does not ever fear going broke if you don't give. But you might go broke if you don't. Because he has promised to bless you as you lean into his work. Bless you. He said, I'll open up the heavens over you. Just participate. Just trust me. Put me to the test. See if I'm not able to make all grace abound toward you. You just got to get from me to sow. Come on, don't just live your life out for a name you call yourself. Use your needle. Pull some thread. Give it to God. Trust him. Give it. Put him to the test. Available. How about this one? Other people have more. So if I had more, I would give more. Available. You be exactly as generous with $1 million as you are with $10,000. You be exactly as generous with 1,000 as you are with 100. It's a heart issue. If it don't start small, it's never going to get bigger. I wonder if you thought, I would take my wife on a date, but I don't have enough money. Look, you can make your wife feel like a princess at Costco. Getting the samples, girl. This is all. Anything you want, aisles 12, 14, and 19. And then you could work your way up to a hot dog and 20-ounce soda combo. It's a heart thing. There's a lot of people who can afford filet mignon wrapped in bacon who treat their wives like a dog. It's a heart issue. It's a romance issue. The most important thing is to give her you. And so that's really where it begins. And generosity, like romance, works on any level. And that's why the tithe is so fair. And generosity is all over Tabitha's story. 3 things, jot them down. She gave what she could, which was a lot. Tunics and garments. But that's misleading because tunics and garments actually means cloaks and capes. My wife and I just got invited to a black tie event. Had never been invited to a black tie event before. We live in Montana, you guys. And we were like, what do you do? We had to, of course, Google it. What does that even mean? And I learned a lot about things that I don't want to know about. Cocktail dress versus a formal gown. My wife and I went to this store called Rent the Runway, where you can rent a dress, you don't have to buy it. And thank God they had a coffee shop. I don't know if I would have survived. But all these dresses, there's a lot to it. And that's the stuff that Dorcas was giving out. The stuff that would cause a widow to have dignity walking through town. Because uncovered by a cape, without a cloak, everyone could see no one took care of them. But you take a widow and you give her a cloak and a cape, she's able to walk through town and feel like just as special as everybody else. That was Dorcas's passion. I'm going to give every woman dignity. I'm going to give every woman the chance to walk through town without anybody looking at them funny. And so Dorcas had, of course, to have a lot of money, to spend money on the materials to make such things, and to be able to do that on top of whatever else she was doing, above and beyond how she would give at church, above and beyond anything else she was doing. And so I would just say to you,
you're the King of Kings.
Here is my praise sheet. I give it to you. Here is my praise sheet. I give it to you.
I'll offer it up to you.
I give it to you. She's my praise.
If you're in this room and you don't know Jesus, if you're watching on the internet and you don't know Jesus, if you're watching through your phone and you don't know Jesus, let me tell you what he wants for Christmas. For you to give your life to him is no more than what he did for you. He gave his life to you. Why don't you give your life to him? That's your gift to the giver. I know they're sowing seeds. I know they're planting into the kingdom of God. That's their gift. Your gift to the giver is to lay prostrate and say, Lord, I give you my life and my sins and my struggles and my trials and my tests, and I give my weakness and my frailty and my vulnerability and my temper and my anger and my craziness and my wildness and my inability to grow up. I give it. I just lay it at your feet. Because you're the king. 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 I bow before you. I bow before you. I bow before you. I bow before you. Father, I pray for every gift given to the giver, whether they are tangible or audible or spiritual, or the personal giving of one's life. I pray, God, that you would receive it as a sacrifice. I pray, God, that we would go home another way. I pray we go back another way. Whatever the devil's got set up, I pray that you cancel it right now. Whatever's in his plot, whatever's in his plan, I pray that it would go down.
Take my life, I give it to you. I give.
And the Magi went home another way. And they left Herod guessing, looking, and they couldn't find Jesus. Because a voice spoke to Joseph and said, take your son and your wife and go into Egypt. And God said, I'm not gonna let them get you, I'm gonna hide you. God said, I'm not gonna let them get you, I'm gonna hide you. I'm gonna hide you because these men, these mysterious Magi, gave a gift to the giver. And it set in motion the course of events that led Herod to try to kill him and gave Joseph permission to hide him. One final thing before I close. To all of you who serve a broke Jesus, to all of you who can only respect a Jesus who has nothing at all and can only envision him as impoverished. I'm not on the boat that's trying to make you believe that he's rich and riding a Bentley. I'm not trying to say that either. But I'm saying when he was a baby, they brought him gold. When he was a kid, they gave him the gold you give to kings while he was still under 2. Joseph is so blessed, he's got to flee with Jesus and Mary because he's got a king's ransom. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh that was given, that was befitting a king. You are not worshiping a wimpy, helpless, distraught, benevolent God. Don't let the manger fool you. He knew who he was. Hey! He knew what he had. He knew what he could do. And I want to challenge you to rethink how you see Jesus. Because I don't know no homeless folk who need a bookkeeper. I don't know nobody in a shelter that needs an accountant. Judas was Jesus' bookkeeper and accountant. I don't know nobody who is, as you portray Jesus, and in need of an accountant. And I don't know no broke folk who have to pay taxes. And I admit I don't know no rich folk who can get money out the fish's mouth. But that's y'all don't hear. You don't hear what I'm saying. But I want to challenge you. You got to rethink what your God can do. You got to rethink what your God is. I want to challenge you to rethink what your God is able to do. In times like these, God's gonna bless you in strange ways, unorthodox ways, unusual ways. Take the brakes off how you see him. He's able to do exceedingly, abundantly, above all ye may ask or think. He'll bring it on camels. 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 Whatever you need, whatever you want, whatever you like. He'll hide you. And for 2 years, while Herod was killing, Jesus was hidden. Until the angel came and told Joseph, he dead now. You can come home. That which was trying to kill you. I gotta quit.
She said
You know
she
she was
too
beautiful.
I don't know if
That's
you
all
ain't
we know.
ever been cussed out by a Jamaican before, but it's extensive.
I haven't.
Woo!
You
I've
have,
never been cussed out by a
apparently.
Jamaican, but I've seen them cuss. Dog, and everybody clear out the way. Can't you go black, cool down, boy? Break it down, some black. Black
a
new
different
fire,
combination.
don't you fuck now.
Stupid. All right, let's get to this last one, Steve. Aaron in High Point says, my boyfriend and I have been together for a year, and he used to put a lot of thought into buying me gifts. For Christmas and for my birthday, he sent me money through Zelle, and that was it. Did he buy the gifts in the beginning to lure me in?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
They got comfortable.
See, why y'all be surprised? You know.
What?
I would work hard in the beginning. A lot of men change over the years. You've all experienced it.
Yeah.
All of you has experienced it.
Mm-hmm.
Can't nobody keep it up like they did in the beginning. Not even the great ones like me.
You falling off a little bit.
Yeah. Ain't where I used to be at.
You slowed down a little bit.
Yeah. I couldn't keep up with my damn self. Yeah.
All right. You need
too
some
much.
Elevate You, Steve.
I did too much, you know.
Coming up at the top of the hour, thank you, CLO. We'll have some entertainment news for you right after this.
You're listening to the Steve Harvey Morning Show.
Paper Ghosts is a true crime podcast investigating the mysterious disappearance and brutal, unsolved murder of Tammy Zawicki.
They just kept telling us from the beginning, she'll be back, she'll be back.
We had no clue where she was. Didn't know where to begin looking.
Tammy's story shocked the nation. The deeper I searched, the more troubling things I found.
The best lead, the best evidence, the best witness was blown off.
Listen to Paper Ghosts on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your favorite shows.
In 2018, it was reported there was a dramatic rise in the number of cases of demonic possession. For many of the most disturbing cases, Father Carlos Martins was often summoned.
I have seen things, very evil things.
I order you to go in the name of Christ.
I'm not leaving. We've been together too long. He needs me.
Listen to The Exorcist Files on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Jason Alexander.
And I'm Peter Tobin.
And we know you've been pining for a brand new podcast hosted by a beloved television icon.
And a largely unknown talk radio host.
Yeah. I wrote that. Pine no more, because we're the hosts of Really No Really, the funny, informative show that seeks the answers to things that make us say, No, really?
You'll laugh, you'll learn.
And we'll get paid. That's Really No Really with Jason Alexander and Peter Tilden on the iHeartRadio app, on Apple Podcasts, or where you get your podcasts.
And anybody who uses the word pining, let me know, because I don't think anybody's used that since the Middle Ages.
Very common word.
In such an endless variety of genres, and how that greatness and depth can manifest itself in each of those genres, regardless of what the genre is. And it's something that's very difficult to understand. Something as simple often, and say, as country and Western music, something like Hank Williams, which is very straightforward in some ways, still, to me, has that quality of inexhaustibility. And it's so...
Yeah, what amazes me, and if I were more profound about these things or more interested in bringing different parts of myself together, I would study it. It's harmony, because melody is one thing. Melody is a lullaby. Any human being is given that. Rhythm, especially consistent rhythm, I'm sure that we are genetically programmed by accident to appreciate that. Harmony is a funny thing. And I think that people who, for one reason or another, either training or temperament or both, feel harmony and get harmony, think that all human beings hear harmony the way they do. No, it's a very odd kind of ear. And I find myself wondering, what is it about major and minor and then everything else, and the fact that if you're a music listener, you associate those things with certain feelings. You often find that other people don't have the same feelings about the ones that you do. But yeah, it's a weird thing, this thing called music. You associate a certain combination of notes with nostalgia. For me, the flatted sixth means it reminds me of the past. Why? Very interesting things. Why would it remind you of anything when it's something that didn't exist when Homo sapiens emerged? Fascinating stuff.
I had a master's student when I taught at Harvard who did her thesis on the meaning of music from a biological perspective. And one of the things she came across, and I don't remember whose thoughts these were, was that deep bass notes remind us of large animals and high notes remind us of small animals. This is obviously a partial explanation,
right?
Obviously, and that more major tones are more maternal and comforting, and minor tones are more discordant and reminiscent of emotional upset. Something. So
that feels right, exactly.
It's so there, and it that ties in part into the emotional aspect of language itself, and all those things that we pick up, and
but then
the question is,
we quote unquote Europeans, I know it's weird for me to say that, but I think people understand. We hear major and minor and low and high that way. I wonder if someone, an indigenous person who had never heard music like that before, let's go to Irian Jaya, it's not called that anymore, but the Western half of the beginning, somebody from there, I wonder if they would hear it that way. And I can make a guess. The low notes being associated with the elephant and the high notes being associated with the hummingbird, that's probably universal because that's true about language. O, ah is big. E is small. That's true. However, the other parts, I wonder if all of that is just arbitrary European stuff that we pick up, from starting from listening to Mother Goose songs and then it going on. I'm sure this has been studied, and I have not nosed into what those people were looking at.
Yes, probably someone knows this, and we're just ignorant about it. But so that's all fascinating. American Studies. Now, you also were educated in American Studies, and you teach American Studies. So a very wide range of teaching interests. And so, tell me about American Studies and what you're teaching and how you got captivated by it.
Well, honestly, American Studies to me was a backdoor thing that I became passingly interested in the 80s after I got my BA, because I thought of it as a way of studying in a systematic way American popular culture of the late 19th through late 20th centuries, which obsesses me to this day. I'm a huge fan of the movies, the radio shows, the comic strips, the cartoons, the music. I could get along living in 1936, hopefully, white, but living in 1936 and knowing everything that was going on better than I think many people could, just because I enjoy it. It's not that I think 1936 was better, but I just like that stuff. And if you do American Studies, you get to read books by historians and philosophers and film scholars about those things. I got a master's degree in it at NYU at a time when the program in American Studies, for most of the people in it, was kind of a night school. And the truth is, I sense where you might very understandably going, which is that I have the master's in American Studies, and that informs why I'm a media commentator about race issues these days. But actually, no, the American Studies degree, I wrote a master's thesis on Scott Joplin's opera, Treemonisha, and then left that behind and got into linguistics, which had no relationship to any of that at all. Linguistics, I found, was where I needed to live, as opposed to American Studies, where I got to read an awful lot of great books. And I don't regret it. I really enjoyed it, but it was really just a passing phase when I was in my early 20s.
Yeah, I did wonder about that relationship and thought that there might be some connection. What is it about the mid-30s that fascinates you so much?
The mid-30s looked good, and it was a terrible, classist, racist, sexist time. Everybody's smoking cigarettes. It's not that I think that it was somehow better, but if you think about it, the 1930s, the fashions, the people looked good, their hair looked good, the cars looked good, the music hit a really sweet spot in terms of how a swing band sounded, or even before that, an early jazz band sounded. And then there was an awful lot of great leftist
jazz.
Literature. The 30s jazz, it's just
30s jazz is great, man.
A great era. The 40s, I kind of lose it, but the 30s was just great feeling. I just love to walk around in it for 7 days and then come back.
So, all right, let me ask you some more questions. So as you developed your career as an early professor, you stopped being an assistant professor, and you were at, it's just escaped my mind. Where were you first?
Cornell.
As a professor? Cornell.
Cornell.
And then you went to the Manhattan Institute, a conservative think tank.
I did. Yeah.
Okay, so obviously that requires some explanation. And so one of the things I kind of wonder about maybe you could shed some light on is what attracted you to conservatism to the degree that you were attracted, and what is conservatism now? I've been trying to puzzle this out psychologically. I'm not thinking about it so much politically, because I think there's room for liberal thought and for conservative thought, and that the dialogue between those two is absolutely necessary. But what was it about conservatism that attracted you? Because it's not an obvious choice.
No, it was really a matter of an eccentricity about the way race has been discussed in this country in the mainstream for a very long time. I was raised by a mother who was a teacher of social work in the 1970s, who actually taught a course called Racism 101. My mother taught me what is today the woke line on how race works, and the things that she taught me were correct. And I have to this day never voted Republican. I am a Democrat. I am a liberal. I always say I am a Black liberal of about 1960. But I found as I came of age that as I analyzed the socio-political things happening around me that concerned race, that I didn't agree with what was supposed to be the default kinds of assumptions. And I found that my assumptions, which I think would have, endeared me thoroughly to the NAACP in 1960, were considered repulsive, inappropriate, naive, or conservative. And so the Manhattan Institute, I didn't choose it. A lot of people think that I'm much more self-directed than I am. A think tank taps you. I barely knew what a think tank was, but they were doing work on race in New York City and beyond that.
Hi, I'm Father Mike Schmitz, and you're listening to the Bible in a Year podcast, where we encounter God's voice and live life through the lens of Scripture. The Bible in a Year podcast is brought to you by Ascension. Using the Great Adventure Bible timeline, we'll read all the way from Genesis to Revelation, discovering how the story of salvation unfolds and how we fit into that story today. This is day 17. Let's keep on going. And day 17, we'll be reading Genesis chapter 33 and 34, Job chapter 23 and 24, and Proverbs chapter 3, verses 13 through 18. As always, I am reading from the Revised Standard Version Catholic edition of the Bible. I'm using the Great Adventure Bible you can get from Ascension. Speaking of Ascension, if you want to download your own Catholic Bible in a Year reading plan, the reading plan that we're following this entire year, you can visit ascensionpress.com/Bible in a Year. Again, that's ascensionpress.com/Bible in a Year. You can subscribe in your podcast app. You also can sign up for our email list by texting the word Catholic Bible to 33777. That's all one word, all together, all caps or no caps, doesn't matter. Catholic Bible to 33777. Again, as I said, today we are reading from Genesis chapter 33 and chapter 34. As we heard yesterday, Jacob wrestled with the angel all night, and his name was changed. His name was changed from Jacob to Israel, which marked something unique, and it marks something we have never seen yet in the Bible. In this whole story of salvation, chapter 33 reveals something we have not yet seen. We've seen plenty of brokenness. We've never seen reconciliation. So here we start with Genesis chapter 33 and 34. And Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, about 400 men with him. And so he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the two maids, and he put the maids with the children in the front, then Leah with her children, and Rachel and Joseph last of all. He himself went on before them, bowing himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. But Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. And when Esau raised his eyes and saw the women and children, he said, "Who are these with you?" Jacob said, "The children whom God has graciously given your servant." Then the maids drew near, they and their children, and bowed down. Leah likewise and her children drew near and bowed down. And last, Joseph and Rachel drew near, and they bowed down. Esau said, "What do you mean by all this company which I met?" Jacob answered, "To find favor in the sight of my Lord." But Esau said, "I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself." Jacob said, "No, I beg you. If I have found favor in your sight, then accept my present from my hand, for truly to see your face is like seeing the face of God. With such favor have you received me. Accept, I beg you, my gift that is brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough." Thus he urged him, and he took it. Then Esau said, "Let us journey on our way, and I will go before you." But Jacob said to him, "My Lord knows that the children are frail, and that the flocks and herds giving suck are a care to me. And if they are overdriven for one day, all the flocks will die. Let my Lord pass on before his servant, and I will lead on slowly, according to the pace of the cattle which are before me, and according to the pace of the children, until I come to my Lord in Seir." So Esau said, "Let me leave with you some of the men who are with me." But he said, "What need is there? Let me find favor in the sight of my Lord." So Esau returned that day on his way to Seir. But Jacob journeyed to Succoth, and built himself a house, and made booths for his cattle. Therefore the name of the place is called Succoth. And Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, on his way from Padan Aram. And he camped before the city. And from the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, he bought for 100 pieces of money the piece of land on which he had pitched his tent. Then he erected an altar, and called it El Elohe Israel. Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to visit the women of the land. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor the Hivite, the prince of the land, saw her, he seized her, and lay with her, and humbled her. And his soul was drawn to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. He loved the maiden, and spoke tenderly to her. So Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, saying, "Get me this maiden for my wife." Now Jacob heard that he had defiled his daughter Dinah, but his sons were with his cattle in the field, so Jacob held his peace until they came. And Hamor the father of Shechem went out to Jacob to speak with him. The sons of Jacob came in from the field when they heard of it, and the men were indignant and very angry, because he had wrought folly in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, for such a thing ought not to be done. But Hamor spoke with them, saying, "The soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. I beg you, give her to him in marriage. Make marriages with us. Give your daughters to us, and take our daughters for yourselves. You shall dwell with us, and the land shall be open to you. Dwell and trade in it, and get property in it." Shechem also said to her father and to her brothers, "Let me find favor in your eyes, and whatever you say to me I will give. Ask of me ever so much as marriage present and gift, and I will give according as you say to me. Only give me the maiden to be my wife." The sons of Jacob answered Shechem and his father Hamor deceitfully, because he had defiled their sister Dinah. They said to them, "We cannot do this thing, to give our sister to one who is uncircumcised, for that would be a disgrace to us. Only on this condition will we consent to you, that you will become as we are, and every male of you will be circumcised. Then we will give you our daughters, and we will take your daughters to ourselves, and we will dwell with you and become one people. But if you will not listen to us and be circumcised, then we will take our daughter, and we will be gone." Their words pleased Hamor, and Hamor's son Shechem, and the young man did not delay to do the thing, because he had delight in Jacob's daughter. Now he was the most honored of all his family, so Hamor and his son Shechem came to the gate of their city and spoke to the men of their city, saying, "These men are friendly with us. Let them dwell in the land and trade in it, for behold, the land is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters in marriage, and let us give them our daughters. Only on this condition will the men agree to dwell with us, to become one people, that every male among us be circumcised as they are circumcised. Will not their cattle, their property, and all their beasts be ours? Only let us agree with them, and they will dwell with us." And all who went out of the gate of his city hearkened to Hamor and his son Shechem, and every male was circumcised, all who went out of the gate of his city. On the third day, when they were sore, two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords and came upon the city unawares, and killed all the males. They slew Hamor and his son Shechem with the sword, and took Dinah out of Shechem's house and went away. And the sons of Jacob came upon the land, and plundered the city, because their sister had been defiled. They took their flocks and their herds, their donkeys, and whatever was in the city and in the field, all their wealth, all the little ones, their wives, all that was in the houses, they captured and made their prey. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have brought trouble on me by making me odious to the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. My numbers are few, and if they gather themselves against me and attack me, I shall be destroyed, both I and my household." But they said, "Should he treat our sister as a harlot?" Job chapter 23 and 24.
What on earth? So the point is, in the Mormon temple ceremony, even to this day, in the videos they watch, Elohim sends Jehovah down to organize pre-existing matter into the earth. And he does so accompanied by Michael. So Jehovah is not alone. He's sent by Elohim, and he's accompanied by Michael. But what does Isaiah 44:24 say? "I, Yahweh, am the maker of all things, stretching out the heavens by myself and spreading out the earth all alone." Now, we used to have these really cool shirts. This was back in the day. This was a long time ago. We called them the Witnessing with the Word t-shirts. And they were this really cool color fade. And I mean, this was 1980s, man. This was 1985, I'd say. 85, 86. I don't know. Well, okay. All right. So 1980s anyway. And I remember once I had to get up early in the morning. I had driven up to Salt Lake City, General Conference. Had to get up early in the morning, go to the airport, like 2 o'clock in the morning to pick up somebody at the airport. Tony, remember? And I was wearing one of these Witness the Word t-shirts. And so this was before 9/11, obviously, so you could actually go to the gate and wait for people. Back in the good old days, when traveling was fun. And this, we had Isaiah 44:24, Isaiah 43:10, Deuteronomy 6:4, and then we had some New Testament texts like Colossians 2:9 and stuff like that, because it was for both Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses. And this Jewish guy comes up to me and starts talking to me in Hebrew. But while he's doing so, he's reading it, and his eyes go down. He sees the Greek, and all of a sudden he realized, and he sees the Alpha and Omega. And oh, was he offended that we would have the Hebrew Scriptures on a shirt? Oh, he didn't want to talk to me much after that. Didn't want to talk to me at all. But the point is that the text says, Jehovah says, that he did all these things by himself and all alone. So, who's right? Was it Elohim sending Jehovah down in company with Michael? Or did Jehovah get it right in Isaiah 44:24? That's the question we would have for our Mormon friends. Now, another text right in that same area is Isaiah 43:10. Now, I forgot to mention this, but in my debate with Ayub Karim, just a couple weeks ago, in fact, 2 weeks ago tomorrow, in his opening statement, he quoted Isaiah 43:10 and said this was his favorite Bible verse. I was excited. Isaiah 43:10, you would think that would have been the verse I would have listed for Mormons, but what I love about Isaiah 43:10 is the fact that while Jehovah's Witnesses know the verse, and yeah, I mean, its relevance for dealing with Mormons is clear. Before me there was no God formed, there shall be none after me. The last portion of the verse is the one that we normally end up quoting to Mormons. Cuts the eternal law of progression right in half. But Jehovah's Witnesses get their name from this verse. This is where their name came from. You are my witnesses, declares Jehovah. So there it is. Isaiah 43:10, that's where the name came from. You are my witnesses, declares Jehovah, and my servant whom I have chosen, that you may know and believe me and understand that I am he. Before me there was no God formed, there will be none after me. Now, if you've listened to the debate I did a year and a half ago up in Denver with the open theist fellow, you heard me explain the relevance of this particular text. Because Jesus quotes this text in John 13:19, and he does it in the context of telling the disciples about what is going to happen in the future, specifically in regards to Judas. Well, that's the context in Isaiah 43. Jehovah says to his people, I'm going to tell you, you're my servant who I was chosen. You may know, believe, and understand that I am he. It's in all the context of predictive prophecy, what's going to be happening in bringing Cyrus and all the rest of this stuff. And Jesus takes those words and applies them to himself in John 13:19. So that you may know, understand, believe that I am he. And that phrase, and understand that I am he, in Isaiah 43:10, is ki anahu. And anahu is the Hebrew that comes across in the Greek Septuagint as ego eimi. Ego eimi. And so hati ego eimi is what you have in the Greek Septuagint. That's what comes across into John 13:19, John 18:5-6, John 8:24, 8:58. These are the places where John uses the I am phrases of Jesus. And so, what a tremendous irony that in the very verse that Jehovah's Witnesses derive their name you have testimony to the deity of Christ. And the vast majority of them do not know that. And if you want to plant something in a Jehovah's Witness mind, I mean, they are not going to take literature from you, okay? And they're going to forget anything you say about John 1:1 because they've heard 1,000 times before. But I guarantee you go through the I am statements and then show them this one, that in Isaiah 43:10, Jesus applied these words to himself in John 13:19, the very name, the very verse from which you get your name. They'll never forget that. They will never, ever forget that. Trust me, they won't. They won't. Okay. Wow. I figured time was going to do this to me. Not overly shocking. Let's look at John 17:5 for Oneness Pentecostals. Oneness Pentecostals. Yeah. You figured you knew exactly what I would do, right? No. Oneness Pentecostals, John 17:5. Now, Father, glorified me together with yourself, the glory which I had with you before the world was. This is one of those great texts where Jesus specifically speaks of his personal existence in the presence of the Father before Bethlehem. And if you understand Oneness Pentecostal theology, the